All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Community Church. We're glad that you are here. We're going to spend some time singing together. You're welcome to stand and join us. Remember those walls that we called sin and shame? They were like prisons that we couldn't escape. But he came and he died and he rose. Those walls are rubble now. Remember those giants we called death and grave? They were like mountains that stood in our way. But he came and he died and he rose. Those giants are dead now. Sing, this is our God. This is our God. This is who he is. He loves us. This is our God. This is what he does. He saves us. He bore the cross, beat the grave. Let heaven and earth proclaim. This is our God, King Jesus. Remember that fear that took our breath away. Faith so weak that we could barely pray. But he heard every word, every whisper. Now those altars in the wilderness of his faithfulness, never once did he fail, and he never will. This is our God. This is our God. This is who he is. He loves us. This is our God. This is what he does. He saves us. He bore the cross, beat the grave. Let heaven and earth proclaim. This is our God, King Jesus. Who pulled me out of that pit? He did, he did. Who paid for all of our sin? Nobody but Jesus. Who pulled me out of that pit? He did, he did. Who paid for all of our sin? Nobody but Jesus. Who rescued me from that grave? Yahweh, Yahweh. Who gets the glory and praise? Nobody but Jesus. Who rescued me from that grave? Yahweh, Yahweh. Who gets the glory and praise? Nobody but him. This is our God. This is who he is. He loves us. This is our God. This is what he does. He saves us. He bore the cross, beat the grave. Let heaven and earth proclaim. This is our God, King Jesus. He bore the cross. He bore the cross, beat the grave. Let heaven and earth proclaim. This is our God, King Jesus.
Higher than the mountains that I face, and it's stronger than the power of the grave. Constant in the trial and the change. This one thing, it remains. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love. And on and on and on and on it goes. For it
of fire, time after time. Born of His Spirit, washed in His blood, and what He did for me on Calvary is more than enough. Oh, I trust in God, my Savior, the one who will never fail. He will never fail. Perfect submission, all is at rest. I know the author of tomorrow stored my steps. So this is my story, and this is my song. I'm praising my risen King and Savior all the day long. I trust in God, my Savior, the one who will never fail. He will never fail. I trust in God, my Savior, the one who will never fail. He will never fail. I sought the Lord, and He heard, and He answered. I sought the Lord, and He heard, and He answered. I sought the Lord, and He heard, and He answered. That's why I trust Him. That's why I trust Him. I sought the Lord, and He answered. I sought the Lord, and He answered. I sought the Lord, and He heard, and He answered. That's why I trust Him. That's why I trust Him. I sought the Lord, and He heard, and He answered. I sought the Lord, and He heard, and He answered. I sought the Lord, and He heard, and He answered. That's why I trust Him. That's why I trust in God, my Savior, the one He will never fail. I trust in God, my Savior, the one who will never fail. He will never fail. I sought the Lord, and He heard, and He answered. I sought the Lord, and He heard, and He answered. I sought the Lord, and He heard, and He answered. That's why I trust Him. That's why I trust in God. Thank you for singing with us. You can have a seat.
Hey, my name's Allie, this is Tom,
Good morning.
and what a day. You know, we got to trek through the snow this morning, we have the Super Bowl tonight, you know, quite a day. Yeah, some people.
Some people are excited.
But it's good that we get to spend a little bit of our time this morning together.
Yeah, we're glad that you guys are here. Glad you're here safely as well. If this happens to be one of your first times with us, perhaps this morning is your first time, brave of you to go through all of that weather to get here. We want to hear from you, and there's a couple ways you can do that. If you go to communitychurch.net/connect, there's an online form there. If you fill that out, just say hello. We'll send you a gift card in the mail. You can also use that QR code in front of the seat in front of you there. You can scan that and fill out that same form. Or if you're in person after the service, downstairs in the cafe, there's a big banner behind a table that says, I'm new. Go to that table, talk to one of our hosts there, let them know how you heard about us, and they'll just give you a gift for showing up.
If you haven't heard, our groups registration is open now. So if you want to find out more about that, you can go to our website at communitychurch.net/groups, or you can go to the table that's actually set up downstairs. It's a big green table specifically for groups and to answer any questions you have about that. Also, if you've been here for any amount of time at all and you've experienced anything good here, it is in large part because of people who give consistently and generously. So if giving is something that you're interested in doing, you can go to the website, communitychurch.net/give, and you can set that up. But we want to let you know that if this is not your church home, we don't want you to feel any pressure to give. We're just glad you're here.
Yeah. One last thing we want to let you know about. Our neighbors down the street, First Presbyterian Church of Babylon, they run a food pantry, and they are running low on some very specific items. Most of them are non-perishables. So there's a list up there. If you are so inclined, we'd love to help them out. We're gathering all of this stuff by the 23rd of this month to hand it off to them on the 25th. That's a Monday. If you're willing, there's a list there. If you scan that QR code or go to the same page that Ali just mentioned, communitychurch.net/give. There's a list there. And purchase those items, bring them here. We'll give them to them. It's just a great way for us to support the great work that they are doing in this community. And that's all we got for this morning. So without further ado, here's part 2 of a message series called Hot Mess. Here we go.
All right, well, this week we're in the second part of a series called Hot Mess. I'm glad that you joined us today. You made it through the cold mess outside. So it's great to be together again. If it's your first time with us, we're so glad you're here. My name's Lou, I'm one of the pastors here. And we're in the second part of a series. We group our teachings together in what we call a series, but don't worry, I'll bring you up to speed real quick. What we're talking about is relationships. Not just romantic relationships, but friendships, family relationships, work relationships, dating relationships, all sorts of different relationships. And we're talking about the complexity of these relationships, right? Like people are complicated, and I'm sure you've experienced that before if you've ever had any kind of relationship with people, right? There are times, you ever been here? There are times where you're in a conversation with someone and you think one thing's happening, right? But then you find out when you leave the conversation, their experience was totally different than your experience, right? Like the messages that were communicated were totally different than you thought they were. Or maybe you've sacrificed greatly for someone. You've given so much of yourself. You've tried so hard. And then it comes out later, they feel like you didn't do anything, you know? Or maybe you put a lot of thought and care into this thing, this way you were going to express love or appreciation or whatever, and then you're told afterwards, like, you didn't even try, right? It feels like a big, like, swing and a miss. Because people are complicated, but relationships are worth it. I told you last week, if you were here, that there's this big study that happened, it's still happening over at Harvard. It's been 85 years, and what they're doing is trying to figure out what makes people feel satisfied in life. And what they found, like, the shared the shared factor of the people who feel like their lives are satisfying has so much to do with the health of their relationships. That is the greatest determining factor. We're told, according to this study, the greatest determining factor of the satisfaction of your life will have to do with your relationships, which I just think is fascinating. But relationships are complicated. And so now I've never experienced any of those complicated situations with relationships, but I heard of people who have. Actually, Allie and I, we have this joke. I think it's funny. Every once in a while, we'll sit down and we'll just kind of talk about our relationships, our relationship, like between the two of us. Allie's my wife, in case you haven't been here before. And she'll say, like, I just feel like things have been going so well lately. Or sometimes she'll be like, there's some things we really need to work on. But no matter what she says, I'm always surprised. I'm always surprised to find out things are like going great or they're not going great. It's like always news to me. Anyway. So they're complicated. So last week we laid out this principle, this idea that I hope will begin to bring some clarity to the fog. Because we're not going to solve all the problems, but my hope is that there are some ideas that will bring some simplicity to the complexity. And last week, what we talked about is desires and expectations. How our relationships, all of them, begin with desires, like hopes and dreams, things that I want from someone, somewhere, someday. Not just in a romantic relationship, but in friendships, in family relationships. There are things that I want. These are desires, and they're not right or wrong. They just are. They're just things that we want from someone, somewhere, someday. And so it could be for you, if we're talking about romantic relationships, maybe you're like, okay, one day I want to meet someone who's going to cook for me, who's going to love to cook for me. Or maybe your story is one day I want to meet someone who's going to want me to cook for them, and that's a desire. Or maybe you want to find someone who's just going to sweep you off your feet and be super romantic. And that's a desire that you want from someone someday, right? There's all these desires. Or maybe if it's not a romantic relationship, maybe it's a friendship. You're like, I want to find a friend who's going to send me cards on my birthday. My best friend. We're always going to send each other cards. We're going to write like meaningful things in them. And then we're going to spend every birthday skiing together because that's what my dad did when I was a kid. And so I want to do that, or whatever your story is. And these are desires. But at some point, often, there's a shift where the desires become expectations. And sometimes this happens when you get married. Sometimes it happens when you reach a certain age. Sometimes it happens after you become Facebook official. Sometimes it happens after you have the DTR, the define the relationship talk. But desires can shift to expectations where all of a sudden, what I wanted from someone somewhere someday becomes what I expect of you today. Like what you're supposed to do. And while we may not use that language, that's what's going on internally. And so it goes from like, well, I want someone somewhere to cook for me one day to, well, like, what do you mean we're having takeout again? Or it's DoorDash again. Right? It feels like you're not doing what you're supposed to do. It goes from like, oh, I'd love to meet someone who's going to be romantic all the time to like, we never do anything anymore. Because you were supposed to do that. Maybe I didn't articulate it, but I thought we were on the same page. You were supposed to do this for me. Or it's like, what do you mean? I didn't get a card this year from you. Or what do you mean you're going to be out of town on my birthday? We were supposed to spend our birthdays to get, like, what we wanted from someone someday can very quickly become what I expect of you, what you're supposed to do. And the problem with that is that an unfulfilled desire feels very different than an unmet expectation. An unfulfilled desire is like, well, I wanted that but didn't get it. What are you going to do, right? An unmet expectation is you were supposed to. You didn't. This was what I was supposed to have. And now there's a feeling like you owe me. And if you're in a relationship that feels like there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of bargaining, a lot of negotiating, a lot of you did this, but I did this, it might be because we're each holding each other to a bunch of expectations. And the relationship becomes very heavy. And it's not filled with much gratitude. Because when you get it right in a relationship that's built on expectations, you've only done what you're supposed to do. Like, congratulations, you didn't fail. You've done your job. It's about time we went out to dinner. And so it sucks the gratitude out of relationships. And that's a big, complicated idea. I know it really sparked a lot of meaningful conversations over the past week. That's available online if you want to go back and listen to the whole thing, because it's a complicated idea. But the answer to that, we looked at a letter written by the Apostle Paul, who shows us that the answer, according to him, is submission. Submit. He says to submit to one another. Submit to one another, which is not very exciting, and it's not going to be on anybody's Valentine's Day card, and there are no songs written about it. But the idea is it's not 50-50. Like, let's just both be equally deprived. It's 100-100. And it's the picture of complete submission to one another. And he says to do it out of reverence for Christ. Now, this isn't just like an added religious statement because it's in the Bible. What he's saying here is to submit to one another out of not love for one another, not out of concern for one another. He says, out of reverence for Christ. Like, he brings in a third party. Now, reverence is not the idea of like fear, like, oh no, what's he gonna do to me if I don't submit? It's the idea of like responding to him. Like, do good for her because of what God has done for you, not because of what she's done for you. Do good in response to the goodness that God has done and shown to you. And this is where faith becomes not just like a thing that's part of who we are, like that we write in our little self-description, but this is where like your faith becomes something that actually empowers and transforms your relationships. And so submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. We unpacked that a lot last week. We call this mutual submission. Mutual submission. That's the idea that hopefully can bring clarity to the fog, or at least the picture of the ideal that we're shooting for. Instead of 50-50, it's 100-100. This week, we're looking at another principle, and I'm just going to warn you right off the bat. This can be uncomfortable, the principle that we're talking about this week, or at least it comes from a text, a passage that's uncomfortable. It might not sit right with you. It might feel like it's out of touch culturally, but if we'll embrace the discomfort and just sit in it for a few minutes, I think what you'll see is that there's something so profound within this passage. There's something that could be like an aha moment for you. It paints a picture of a broader, or it leads us to a broader principle that's so important in relationships. And what's interesting is that the people that this letter was originally written to would have also found it to be extremely uncomfortable and out of touch with their culture, but for a totally different reason. All right? So here we go. Are you ready? Okay. It says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands. This is the discomfort that I was talking about. Now, to what extent? Okay, what extent? Like, how much? Like, when he's getting it right, you know, when he deserves it, when he's finally got his act together, when it's been a little while and finally he might be not deserving, but okay, we can understand why we would submit to him, like hold him up, you know, like respect him. He says, submit yourselves to your own husbands. Here's the extent. He says, as you do to the Lord. Like, we're going all the way with this, right? Like, to the max, 10 out of 10 submission. This is no one's got this tattooed on them. Like, this is not really a very exciting verse. But he goes on, right? Now, it's important to recognize this is part of what we call a household code. Which was a popular way of writing in the ancient world. So there'd be letters that people would write to other groups of people, and within those letters there'd be household codes where there'd be specific instructions to different people in the home, and this is the beginning of one. And so Paul addresses these wives and says, submit yourselves to your husbands as you do to the Lord. Then there's a little section about that, and then he moves on to the next group of people, and here's what he says. Here's the topic sentence of the next section. He says, husbands, love your wives. And this is a little easier to handle. Love them, just as Christ loved the church. That's nice, like metaphorical. Maybe you will see that on a Valentine's Day card. But then he says, and gave himself up for her. Like, to what extent? To what extent? That's right, whoa. To what extent? Like, all the way. all the way. And then he steps back. There's this long section to the husbands. He steps back and he summarizes the whole idea, the whole thing that he's saying here. He goes, okay, so each one, still talking to the husbands, he says, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself. And the wife must respect her husband. This is the idea, he's going back to this idea of submission, like looking to him, holding him up, right? Now, like I said, this might feel like, okay, come on, really? Maybe you totally disagree with this, and I get that. Maybe this feels out of touch with culture, and I get that. But what's interesting is that the people reading this would have been just as uncomfortable, if not more uncomfortable. But for us, it's what he says to the wives. For them, it's what he said to the husbands. In the ancient world, they had these household codes, which were pretty common things. But in the household codes, the husbands were never addressed. Because in that culture, in that world that they lived in, you wouldn't dare tell a husband how to rule his home. In a culture where women and children were not given much value, were treated as disposable, literally. Like you can just let them go if they were an inconvenience to you. When Paul's writing and he says, wives, submit to your husbands, everyone's like, okay, you've heard this before. And then as soon as he says husbands, everyone in the room would have turned around. Like, are you serious, husbands? And then he says to love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave everything for them. He says to love them as you love yourself, like just as much as you love yourself. And if that's not enough, just think about how Jesus gave everything for us and have that attitude toward your wife. This would have been radical. The idea that a husband would give all of himself to his wife was not an idea that anyone was familiar with. This is kind of a different message for a different time, but Paul's continuing the teachings of Jesus here when he's giving value to women. Jesus had a massive following of women because of the way that he treated women. Because in the ancient world, no one treated women as equals like he did. It was radical the way that he spoke to, dealt with, and addressed women. And so Paul's continuing this here. Now, even if that you don't know that, right? Even if we don't go into the historical context of household codes and all that, there's something important here that's happening in the passage. And this is why it's dangerous to read a Bible verse on its own. You can make the Bible say anything that you want it to say if you take a little clip and pull it out and put it behind your agenda. And I'm sure you've seen that before and witnessed it. You can make the Bible build any argument you want it to build if you pick the right words. It's called taking something out of context. And so when someone tells you, especially if it's in the context of an argument or a you should, if they tell you this is what the Bible says, you should say, where does it say that? Who does it say it to? And what else does it say? Because it's part of a much larger story. This is part of a much longer letter. And here's a great example of why it's so important to understand what else it says. If you were here with us last week, or even just 5 minutes ago, you know that this started off with Paul saying, submit to one another. And then he says, wives, submit to your husbands. In other words, husbands, submit to your wives. And then he says, wives, submit to your husbands. In fact, the word submit in our English translations where it says wives, submit to your husbands, it's not even in there in the original language. He borrows that verb from the sentence before when he says submit to one another. You can do that in ancient Greek. And so wives to your husbands. So why? Like he's being redundant. Why does he need to say that? If his point is husbands submit to your wives and wives submit to your husbands, why would he just say wives submit to your husbands? In the next part, he says husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church. But if you're here with us last week, you know that a few verses before this, he said, love one another, just as Christ loved you. In other words, husbands, love your wives, but wives, love your husband. Both sides are supposed to give love, and both sides are supposed to give respect. Both sides are supposed to love one another, and both sides are supposed to hold each other up. So what is he getting at here? What I would argue is that Paul is not, in this passage, he's not assigning roles. He's explaining needs, right? Like imagine if we were writing a household code today and I were to say, parents, feed your kids, right? Moms, hold your babies. Children, walk your dogs. Like, what's the point of me communicating that? It's saying less about what the parents are supposed to do and more about what the children need. Like the children need to eat. It's less about what the kids have to do for the dog and more about what the dog needs to be walked. It's less about what moms are supposed to do for babies and more that babies need to be held. It's not an assignment of roles, it's an explanation of needs. What Paul seems to be suggesting here, and you may totally disagree with this, but what he seems to be suggesting is that men and women, husbands and wives, both need love and both need respect, but there is a way that men thrive on respect. And women need love and need respect, but there is a way that they thrive on love. He's addressing not what the giver needs to give, but what the receiver needs to receive here. So for me, I'm like, okay, well, what does this look like, right? How do you make someone feel loved besides saying, I love you, right? If this is true for you, if this is true for the relationship you're in, if you're married to someone who thrives, would say they thrive on love, what we're saying here, like what love looks like, is being valued, being treasured, being pursued, like captivating, worthy of attention, worthy of sacrifice, of giving everything. If you want to make someone feel loved, here's some practical things. If you're in a relationship and your wife needs to feel loved, here's some practical things you can do. Show affection. Don't just say, I love you, but show it intentionally. Go out of your way to express it. Listen without trying to fix everything. This is a problem for me in my relationship. Allie will be like, hey, I've got this thing, whatever. And I'm like, oh, why don't you just, whatever. She's like, shh, don't fix it. Just listen. I don't get that. I'm like, well, that's a problem. Seems like it should be fixed. No, we need to talk about it. Okay, fine. Listen without trying to fix everything. Give them your attention. Make them feel like a priority. Put the phone away. Pursue them, even after the commitment. Even after you've gotten married, even after you've been dating for a while, continue to pursue them. Be emotionally available. Ask about how they feel. Share how you feel. Put them first. Treat them like they're worthy of being pursued. Now again, what Paul seems to be suggesting here is that this, for a lot of people, this is a need. For a lot of women, this is a need. There's something that allows women to thrive when they feel this way. There's this famous study done several years ago where people were asked, like a random group of people were asked if they would rather, for the rest of their lives, if they would rather be alone and unloved or inadequate and disrespected for the rest of their lives, what would they choose? And in that study, the vast majority of men said that they would rather be alone and unloved for the rest of their lives than inadequate and disrespected. And in that study, the vast majority of women said that they would, though no one wants this, said that they would rather feel inadequate and disrespected than alone and unloved. This may not be true of you, but the idea here is that we need to know what we need from one another. And so respect, if you're in a relationship with someone who thrives on respect, then what this looks like is being treated as if you're capable, right? Respect has this idea of competence. Being worthy of respect is being competent, looked to, trusted. People who need respect want to be seen as a capable provider. You can get the job done. You can be trusted to do that. Just a few months ago at this point, my family took a trip to Florida, and we went to Busch Gardens. My parents were there. My brother and sister were there. All our families were there. And all the cousins were there, the nieces and nephews. They were all there. And so by the end of the day, we had gone on a bunch of rides. We'd also played those little games where you can win some prizes. And all of the kids had some kind of prize that they were taking home, those little stuffed animals or a ball or whatever. All of them except one. My little niece, Abby, she didn't have a prize. And so we're getting ready to leave, and Allie, my wife, looks at me. She walks up to me. She goes, "Hey, Abby doesn't have a prize. Everybody else does." She's like, "You need to go over to that basketball game and win her a prize." And she had no idea until Thursday when I told this story at the first service. She had no idea what that did to me internally. I was like, "Me? Like, you need me to go over there and conquer that game for the sake of our niece and her tender emotions?" And so $27 later, after missing, however many shots, my daughter comes over. She's like, let me try. I'm like, "No, this is serious business." And so she just gets the ball. She shoots. First shot goes in. She looks at me and she goes, "Ha!" And I'm like, I feel inadequate and disrespected. But that's the idea, like being looked to and trusted in. Being seen as competent. If you want to make someone feel respected, trust their judgment. Be careful when being critical. Appreciate their efforts and verbalize it. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Speak to them, not down to them. Support them publicly in front of other people. And again, I mentioned some of these things tend to be more true of men. Some of these tend to be more true of women. If you listen to Brené Brown, if you're familiar with any of her writings, she's someone who researches emotion. She specializes in the study of shame. And what's interesting is even in her studies, what she would say is shame, the idea of feeling unworthy of acceptance, belonging, and connection. She said, when you're talking about shame in men, it almost always has the idea of being small, weak, and inadequate. It's the idea of not being worthy of respect. And so if we're not aware of this, if we're not aware of the needs of the other, we can unintentionally send the complete opposite message that we're trying to send. With the best of intentions. It can feel like a swing and a miss. A few years ago, I was at this speaking engagement, and when it was over, I was speaking from the front, and when it was over, somebody came up to me, and they were being very kind with what they were saying. She's like, "There's a lady, she was trying to make me feel great," right? She was like, "Thank you so much. That was so meaningful." And I was like, "Oh, I appreciate that." And I felt very capable, by the end of the conversation. And as she finishes talking, she was about to walk away. She turns around, she goes, "I just want to pick you up and put you in my pocket." And I was like, "Okay. Thank you." Like, what do you even say to that? Like, "I'd love to be in your pocket," right? And the idea, I knew what she meant. She didn't hurt my feelings, but I was going more for like Hercules. I felt a little more like Jiminy Cricket by the end of that conversation. If we're not aware of what our needs are, whatever they may be, we may send the exact opposite message. I also think it's worth noting, right? One more thing with love and respect. In our culture, the way we talk about love, right? We talk about love as something that can be unconditional. We value love that endures, but we don't talk the same about respect. And so however you feel about that, I think it's worth noting. If you're in a relationship with someone who would say, "Yes, I thrive on respect," then you telling them, "You've lost my respect," or "You haven't earned my respect," feels the same to them as them telling you, "I don't love you anymore." Like, "You've lost my love for you." We talk about respect like love like it's given, but respect is earned. And I don't know, maybe it's worth thinking about that. So now, even if you, and like I said, a lot of generalizations there, and you may be like, "No, I do not agree with that at all," right? Even if you're totally anti all of that. there's a bigger principle here that the Apostle Paul says just a few sentences earlier. Here's what it is. He says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. Unwholesome, the idea is not like wrong. Actually has the idea of rotting or tearing people down. He's like, don't tear people down by what you say, but only what is helpful for building others up. Ready? This whole phrase should be in yellow here. According to their needs. Like their individual, specific needs. What they need to hear, not what you want to say, right? Like according to what they need from you, that it may benefit those who listen. It's easy, especially in relationships, to feel like I said what I gotta say. I'm sorry, this is how I am. This is how I communicate. This is how I express myself. That's fine. What Paul seems to be suggesting is that it's not really about you doing the thing. It's about how it's being received from them. What he's saying here, even if you totally disagree with the whole love and respect thing, what he's saying here is that different people have different needs, right? Healthy relationships, no matter what relationship you're in, healthy relationships are not copy-paste. They're custom built. What works for one may not work for another. And if that's true, then loving well, no matter what relationship you're in, loving well, it requires learning well. If you're in a relationship with someone and you value that relationship, part of nurturing that relationship is learning what their needs are, whether they need love or respect, having those conversations. If you drove here with someone you're in a relationship with, you should have a conversation on the way home. Do you feel like that's true? Do you need respect from me? Do you need love for me? When do you feel like I'm not respecting you? When do you feel like I'm not loving you in that sacrificial way? When do you feel like I am? Like it requires having those conversations, learning. And so for the few minutes we have left, what I want to do is give you 2 super practical tools that will help you learn about the people in your life. Super practical tools. If you've heard this before, this will be a reminder for you. If you haven't, this could be an aha moment, all right? The first one is a theory that's put together by a guy named Gary Chapman. It's gotten pretty popular. It's called the 5 Love Languages, all right? Now, he writes about them in the context of romantic relationships, but there have also been books written about how these things apply to the workplace and other relationships, like how to appreciate people. The 5 love languages are words of affirmation. Some people give and receive love through words of affirmation, through what they say. And the idea with the love languages, before I go on, the idea is that all of us probably have 1 or 2 of these languages that we speak more frequently, right? Like if I want to show you that I care about you and my love language is words of affirmation, I'm going to do it by saying things to you. And because of that, if that's how I give love, that's also how I most likely receive it. Like words mean a lot to people who have the love language of words of affirmation. Then there's physical touch. Some people, to feel loved and cared for, appreciated, need to be touched physically. You have to be careful with this one in the workplace. It's best for romantic relationships. Receiving gifts. Some people show love by buying gifts and giving gifts, birthday gifts. These are the people in your life that care a lot about what you get them for their birthday. Quality time. Some people need quality time. Like you've got to sit and have meaningful time. This is my wife Allie's love language. It is not my love language. But that's important to her. She wants us to spend time together. Not like just in the same room on our phones, but like talking with eye contact. Acts of service. Acts of service. These people show and receive love by doing things. They show love by doing things for one another. And they receive love when people do things for them. It's important that you know these languages of the people in your lives, that you're involved with, not just romantically, but that you're in a relationship frequently, like that you deal with frequently. If you don't, you can totally miss. When Allie and I first got married, we weren't really aware of how these love languages fleshed out in our relationship. One of my love languages is acts of service. If I want to show you like how much I care about you, and I have the chance to, I'll do something for you. That's how I show you like, oh, I appreciate this. Look what I did. Look what I built. Look what I cleaned. Look what I whatever, right? That's not Allie's. Hers is quality time. She wants to just spend time together. It's the only non-renewable resource here. And so what will happen is, what this actually had happened several times in our relationship, where she'd go out and I'd be like, I just want to show her how much I care about her, and I'd clean the whole house and cut the grass and try to do everything I could to make everything like perfect when she shows back up. And when she would come home, I'd be exhausted, right? Drained, because I'm like, look what I did for you, right? And for her, it's quality time. So she'd come home and be like, oh, I just want to be with you. I just want to like sit down and have deep, meaningful conversations. And I'm like, I'm tired. I want to go sleep and watch Netflix. And so we're missing each other because I did this to show her how much I care about her. And she's like, why don't you want to spend any time with me? And both of us want the same thing, but we're expressing it in different languages. And so it's so important that we're aware of the love languages of the people in our lives. The other one is a little bit more complicated, but for us here at the church, especially our staff, this has been the most helpful tool. We offer a course that's starting this Wednesday night on this tool. The tool, it's ancient. It's actually hundreds of years old. It's called I Said This, You Heard That. It wasn't originally called that, but they renamed it that. All right, the basic idea is that people tend to fall into one of four categories or have one of four temperaments. Sometimes it's a combination of the two. The temperaments are sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic, and melancholic. We just say yellow, red, green, blue. But yellows speak the language of people and fun. They like change, they like excitement, they're bubbly. It's about people and fun for yellows. They are extroverted, people-oriented. Reds are extroverted, task-oriented. They speak the language of power and control. A lot of times leaders are reds, not in a bad way, power and control in a bad way, but they like to be the one who steers the ship. It's a strength of theirs. They speak the language of power and control. Phlegmatics are introverted, people-oriented, right? They speak the language of peace and harmony. And so they like things to just be nice. Your chill friends that you just can't really fluster. They're probably green. Everything's just smooth and cool, right? Melancholics are people who are introverted and task-oriented. They speak the language of order and security. They tend to be detail-oriented. They know how things go, and so they don't love things like change and things that aren't predictable. These are the people when you're like, oh, let's go on a trip. They're like, okay, how many days are we going to be there? What are we going to need to bring? What's the budget? Like, they know all the details. Those are the blues, okay? This has been so helpful for us working at the church, but also in our family. It's helped us become better parents, knowing who we are and how we are. It's helped us in our marriage. Allie's green. She's just chill all the time. It's all good. I'm yellow-red, right? And so I'm extroverted. Like Thursday night after the service, I've just been around a ton of people. I come home, I'm ready to like exercise and play. And she's like, I've been around people for 4 hours, leave me the heck alone. And that's a difference that we're aware of. And I don't feel rejected because I know her. She also needs our house to be like clean before she goes to bed. That's part of peace and harmony in her environment. And so if there's dishes in the sink and everything's all out of whack, she can't rest. And so just knowing that, I'm like, all right, this doesn't matter to me. I feel like just leave it. But for her, it's got to be just right. And so it helps us. Our daughter is blue. And so we have a calendar in our house for her, only her. She needs to know, what are we doing 4 weeks from now? I told her I had a doctor's appointment coming up literally a month from now. And she's like, I think I have a concert that day. I'm like, okay, that's how she is. Loving well requires learning well. Requires learning well. That course, we're starting it this Wednesday. Highly recommend it if you've never done it before. Here's the story I want to leave you with. So this just happened literally about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. Allie and I were talking about our kids. We're talking about chores, allowance, all this stuff. We came up with this new system. We try to put some structure in the house that they've got to like do their chores before they have their screen time and whatever. We wanted to give them a chance to save up for the things that they wanted, so we changed the system, and we doubled their allowance, but we also changed their chores. And not much. We didn't give them like much more to do, but we wanted to give them more money so that they can learn how to manage their money. So we sit the kids down, and I'm like, all right, so things are going to change. Like from now on, if you want screen time, it's gonna be because of the chores that you did the day before. And now you're gonna have to do this, but you're not gonna have to do this. And I like change and excitement, and I'm thrilled. I'm like, you're gonna love this. And at the end, I'm like, and we're gonna double your allowance. And I'm like, and my daughter, Mia, Blue, is on the other side of the table, like malfunctioning because like something's just off with her. And it bothered me. And I'm looking at her, I'm like, are you kidding? Like, she's listing off all these things. She's like, well, what's gonna happen when we have church on Thursday night? What about Friday? What's gonna happen when I have practice? What about this? What about this? What about that? And the problem is she's right about all of it because she actually remembers that stuff. But I'm sitting there and I'm offended and I'm like, my child is ungrateful. This is a problem. And I'm thinking about all these things. And so the conversation ends. It's kind of tense. She gets up and goes into her room. And I look at Allie. I'm like, what in the world? And Allie goes, she's Blue. Like, she hates change. And we just messed up her entire home life without giving her any input. And we dumped it on her all at one time. And so what I received as a lack of gratitude, as a lack of respect, it was really just a lack of understanding. And that's the question I want to leave you with. Right now, there's probably a chance that you've got some tension in some relationship. Maybe it's with the person you're sitting next to right now. Maybe it's the person you're going to drive home with. Maybe it's the person you left to come here today. But what if the problem in that relationship is not selfishness, if it's not a lack of gratitude, what if it's not disrespect, what if it's not a lack of love? What if it's a lack of understanding? And what if loving well requires learning well? We're starting that course this week. If you want to join us, there's still room. You can sign up. It's Wednesday night. Let's pray, and then we'll get out of here. God, we're grateful that you know us intimately, that you care about us, that you value us, and that each one of us is different. Would you help us to be the kind of people that care enough about one another that will learn about one another? Would you help us be the kind of people that don't just try to love and don't just try to respect, that we put in the time to learn about how to more effectively communicate things like love and respect? Would you make us students of one another out of service for one another and out of reverence for you, in response to who you are and what you've done for us? Would you help us to love people like you love us? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
We're going to sing one more song. You're invited to stand and join us.
You don't just tolerate us, you don't have somewhere to go. We're not your trophy children, you abandon when we roam. Your mercy's not a favor, and your presence isn't rushed. Oh no, our God is love. The cross was not a vehicle for you to finally care. When we look upon your character, your grace was always there. Acceptance not withheld.